Welcome to the Weekly Report. It's May 13 and I'm Robert Barwick. Welcome again, Craig Isherwood.
Hi, Robbie.
Alright, in today's Weekly Report, 1. Ditch the bitch. CEC releases a dossier on the Queen. 2. Churches sell out to depopulation agenda. So first, ditch the bitch. The CEC releases a dossier on the Queen. If anyone's offended by that headline, I'm not sorry. If you've been caught up in the royal hoopla over the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton and all the pomp and circumstance, the $80 million worth of it, perhaps you should remember a few things, namely the death of Princess Diana and the way the Queen acted so sourly on that occasion, and a lot of the other disgusting things that the royal family do, which of course all this pomp and circumstance of the royal wedding is designed to paper over and let people revel in their servitude once more. Because the role of the Queen bears scrutiny. The Queen is not a child who knows no better. She serves. There's a big deal made by monarchists about how well the Queen serves. She serves all right. She serves an imperial institution whose interest is not the welfare of the people, but its interest is to maintain its position as the Venetian-style Doge to the City of London's monetary empire. That's her interest. That's what comes first. So, with that in mind, the CEC has escalated its fight to save the Murray-Darling Basin food bowl and to stop the carbon tax by issuing a dossier on the Queen of England and on her role in using her considerable power to push the green agenda globally in the form of especially the climate change agenda. And here's a copy of the dossier you can see. It's available for download on our website. It's a 4-page PDF document. Note, I haven't talked about Prince Philip yet. This dossier documents the Queen's role. The Queen has considerable power. She usually exercises it behind the scenes. The dossier goes through that. But in the name of climate change, she has exercised her power openly, repeatedly in the last decade to push this agenda through. What the dossier includes is a very timely expose that has been done by Helga LaRouche out of Germany. Now, Helga LaRouche is the wife of Lyndon LaRouche. And what she's done is a favour to the world. She has exposed the release of a manifesto by an organisation in Germany called the Scientific Advisory Council of the Federal Government on Global Change. And it's an acronym WBGU, and that's a copy of this manifesto there. It's called World in Transition, a Social Contract for Sustainability. Now, before I go through, just highlight some of the content. First of all, here's the most important point. This organisation is a front for the Queen. Now, its chairman is Professor Hans Schullenhuber. This man is one of her chief acolytes in pushing the climate change agenda. Apparently, as the story goes, and I'm saying that because these things are usually served up this way for public consumption. In 2004, the Queen was at Balmoral Castle, and there was some kind of storm, weather event. And that's when the Queen had an epiphany that climate change was an enormous threat. So that's the story. Following that epiphany, she ordered Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister, to dispatch to the United States 2 men. The Chief Science Advisor of Great Britain, Sir David King, and this Professor Hans Schullenhuber. And those 2 men were dispatched to the White House to convince then President George W. Bush that climate change was a greater threat than global terrorism. Now, I don't know how much success they had in doing that, but that year, well, first of all, the Observer newspaper in Britain very interestingly called that a rare intervention by the Queen into world politics. So this was everyone understood that this was her exercising her power here to push this through. That year, she inducted Schullenhuber as a commander of the Order of the British Empire in reward for his services. Schullenhuber is also the long-time head of the Tyndall Centre at the East Anglia University in Great Britain. Now, of course, East Anglia University is the headquarters of the fabrication, if you will, of climate change. That's the home of the climatic research unit that cooked the books on all this thing. Schullenhuber is a long-term associate of those clowns, and he was a big part of the lead up to the 2009 Copenhagen conference. That, of course, the Queen very prominently used her power to push that agenda, which was supposed to achieve at the time. Copenhagen was designed to achieve a binding global treaty to set concrete targets for emissions reductions that was supposed to be enforceable and based on an global emissions trading scheme. It failed at that, but not for lack of the Queen personally trying very hard. So, Copenhagen failed, but all the Queen's men, if you will, have regrouped to put this Humpty to get back together again, and they've done it in the form of this manifesto by the WBGU. Just to give the highlights. This demands a zero carbon economy. However, in the context of a total end to the use of fossil fuels and nuclear power. So no nuclear in a zero carbon economy, which means total reliance on renewables, which means, especially in a place like Europe, no power. It demands an emissions trading scheme, so the City of London bankers can loot us all in the name of climate change. It demands the age-old British imperial policy of global free trade, whatever that has to do with the climate, I don't know, but it demands it. It demands a zero carbon regime be imposed on poor countries, and it demands a world government superstructure to enforce all of this. So, Craig, if all these demands, which are effectively demands by the Queen, if they are met, what will be achieved?
Well, it's their intention with this document. It's unmitigated genocide. Their intention is to commit genocide and to smash the national sovereignty of all nations on the planet. The document goes through that very, very clearly and spells out that's their intention. And it's what we've been talking about for a long time in the Citizens Electoral Council, where we put our material out, that the role of the Crown has been to smash national sovereignty through environmentalism. So our fight with the Murray-Darling Basin, the shutdown of our, this magnificent food bowl, is paradigmatic of what these guys intend. Now, it's going to lead to, if the Queen gets her wish, and sane people don't stand up and fight against this, then we are going to see the destruction of human life. And Schullenhuber himself he wants to bring the world's population down to below 1 billion people. Now, what people must realise is that once you begin on a trajectory of reducing the world's population, when does it stop? And that's what I wanted to raise an issue that Mr. LaRouche wrote about, and actually has made a discovery back in as part of his work as a physical economist. And it's this concept of potential relative population density. And he's written about it. He wrote a textbook on this called So You Wish to Learn About Economics in 1984. And he goes through this concept of potential relative population density, because that's what we're actually looking at as a scientific measure of how do you measure the effects of what's being proposed here, these ideas. So let's just have a look at that, because people might be familiar with this idea of population density. Australia, for example, this huge continent of ours, has a population density of a mere 2.8 people per square kilometre. That is, you take the land mass and you divide through by the population of that land mass. Ironically, in Australia...
Are we near the top of the world list, the list of countries?
Oh no, I think we're about second last.
Second last?
Second last. I think there's one other country, it might be Antarctica, but I'm not sure.
I heard it was Mongolia or something
Mongolia,
like that.
Yes. So anyway, the point is we're so depopulated, underpopulated, it's absolutely incredible. But the irony is, if you take Tasmania, with all these wild areas of wilderness, these wilderness parks and so forth, they have a population density of 7.4 people per square kilometre. which means if you took the population density of just Tasmania and applied it to Australia, we could support around about 54 million people. And I don't think Tasmania is actually overpopulated, right?
Well, maybe we should do an opinion poll, because that's the only way to determine whether that would be true or not.
We'll ask those people out in the middle of Australia, eh? Yeah. But look at the other population densities to be relevant here. Look at Japan, 335 people per square kilometre. The United States, again, is a highly depopulated country, 29, right? You think of the United States as being full. No, it's 29 people per square kilometre. And the United Kingdom, Britain, 231. One of the ironies is that where John Howard wanted to put his boat people, Nauru, 541 people per square kilometre, right?
So hang on, the country with 2.8 people per square kilometre that has bumper stickers on cars saying "F off, we're full," is sending refugees to Nauru that has 500 people per square kilometre.
That's correct. I mean, this is the insanity of this particular debate. But that's the crude nature of population density figures, right? It's a simple statistical formulation. So that's one beginning of the measure. But when you look at Australia and you look at land, you have to say, well, not all land is the same. You've got questions of fertility of that land. You've got, in any particular country, you've got the level of technology. So if you compare like modern Australian farming techniques with African techniques, right, the value of the land changes because of the access to technology. So you also have the quality of habitability, right? Like trying to live in Siberia, for example, where it's permafrost, is a very difficult place to live, right? So you have to be able to change that environment to support more people. So you've got these relative issues. So instead of looking at just square kilometres, you have to look at relative square kilometres. Therefore, you have to look at relative potential population density based on those factors. But the most important aspect of what Mr. LaRouche's work is this question of potential. What is the potential within the population of the level of technology that's available to that population? Because those levels of technology can then determine how one uses the land in order to support more population. That comes back to the question of what sort of infrastructure is being provided. High-speed rail, for example, what sort of water is being supplied, what sort of irrigation is available, what sort of power sources. Like, for example, nuclear power, is it going to be nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, antimatter reactions for the future, right? So you look at the potential for the technology within a particular country. But Mr. LaRouche goes one step further, and he says, well, what is the rate of increase of that potential in the population relative to the landmass? What is that potential? Now, if you look at history, you can see, and we use this graph a fair bit, that you had a breakthrough about 1439 with Nicholas of Cusa. We talked a bit about this in past shows, where there was a breakthrough and a discovery made, first of all, on the institution of the nation state. That there was an idea when that he developed in terms of the nation state, where the nation state existed for the people. The common good of the people. Commonwealth is the name that came out of that. Therefore, when you use the nation state to develop the potentials of the population, you can end up with a rising standard of living, support more people, and so forth. Nicholas of Cusa also made. He was the founder of modern science, and as such, modern science came to the fore. That is, he recognised and made it intelligible for people that human beings are created, as we say, imago Dei, in the image of the Creator. In other words, we have a unique ability to make discoveries of the physical principles that are unseen in the universe, but they impinge our senses, and we can then take those principles and employ them into technology. Now, this was a real breakthrough, and what that led to was a massive increase, as you can see on this graph, of the overall population, because we could support more and more people within with those technologies as they were developed. And that's the directionality that mankind has taken. As you see, we've gone from developing, fossil fuels, from burning coal into using oil and gas, and then to nuclear technologies. So we've been able to support, and has been demonstrated throughout history, we've been able to support more and more people. What the Queen is intending to do is cut off the potential development of populations, to destroy the means to support populations. And once you start to head in that direction, there is no stopping point. You unleash factors that you have no control over. Diseases, new types of diseases, because if you impoverish your population, you weaken the immune systems, you're going to get a whole raft of new diseases, and that could be fatal for the entirety of the world's population. What she's proposing is absolutely insane. It's in fact evil, because the intention is to destroy human life. So this is a very dangerous policy, and it requires a real mobilisation from every person on the planet to fight this evil. And by promoting this, she has already proven unfit to hold the position she has, and she should go back to being a janitor or something. Or maybe she's not even fit for that job.
Well, there's tomorrow's headline if the media had any guts. Just further to that, on the 17th of June, this WBGU crowd is holding a conference on their demands in Germany. So the worldwide movement associated with Lyndon LaRouche is mobilising across the board to stop this in its tracks. Helga LaRouche makes a very salient point that in 1925, when Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, it wasn't taken seriously, and the result was genocide. This is the equivalent. We are taking it seriously because we are determined there will be no genocide. As the world set up the World War II, never again. And you can follow on our website and call the CEC office for more information on the scientific background that Craig has given us a sample of there. So in a related note, finally, churches sell out to the depopulation agenda. Today is Friday the 13th, aptly, and it's the day that Sustainable Population Minister Tony Burke's department is releasing its Sustainable Population Strategy for Australia. Now, this strategy is entirely a creation of the Fabian Society and Sustainable Population Australia, which is a spin-off from Prince Philip's Australian Conservation Foundation. The whole department, the whole ministry was a creation of those. Remember, Kevin Rudd, something like 10 years after it was first called for, set up a population ministry in last year, just before he lost his job. And when Gillard took over, who was a Fabian, she renamed it the Sustainable Population Ministry. She put Tony Burke in charge of it, the man who was already in charge of shutting down the food bowl. Who's Tony Burke? A hardcore greenie activist of the Wilderness Society before he became a Member of Parliament. They set up this inquiry. One of the three co-chairs was none other than Bob Carr, the former Premier of New South Wales, also a member of the Fabian Society, who was such a fanatical depopulator, he is known as the Malthus of Maroubra. That was his political nickname in New South Wales. This morning, in anticipation of this, Dick Smith was all over the radio and TV as the town crier for its coming, and of course Dick Smith is the gentleman that Craig had hand-to-hand combat with on this question. These are all the people and others who, frankly, they're all part of a cult, and it's a cult to eradicate Aussies. Not just stopping new ones from coming into existence, but getting rid of the old ones. When you have an agenda, when your obsession is there's too many people, you're not going to be that worried when there's mass deaths, when there is bushfires that kill 180 people because of green policies not allowing land clearing. You're not going to be worried when electricity shortages, because greenies are helping to block the building of new power stations, cause 350 elderly people in Melbourne to lose their lives in a fortnight in a heat wave. You're not going to be worried when there's budget cuts on hospitals that increase the number of totally avoidable deaths in hospitals, because you're not going to do all you can to stop that, because in the back of your mind you think, well, ultimately that's a positive thing. So there is nothing good about this agenda, and what's totally atrocious right now is there is an escalation pushing this anti-human agenda among churches. Now, last week we talked about the open letter that Craig Isherwood issued to the Anglican Church for their Anglican Public Affairs Commission submission to this Sustainable Population Strategy inquiry, which was based on the anti-human, anti-Christian ideas of Mark O'Connor and Sustainable Population Australia. Well, last night there was an event in Canberra, Thursday the 12th of May, hosted by an outfit calling themselves, laughably, Christians for an Ethical Society. The event was on overpopulation. It was addressed by two speakers, both members of Sustainable Population Australia, Mark O'Connor himself and a gentleman named Jeff Buckmaster. So just to recap, Mark O'Connor is the man who says we need a Chinese-style one-child policy for Australia. He says we should have an immigration program that forbids people coming to Australia from poor countries, because if they come here, they raise their living standard, and that's bad for Mother Earth. That's not Christianity. We deployed at this event, the CEC went there, because we are not going to let this crowd have their own way. They did not want to answer our questions. That was quite obvious. They did recognise our presence, obviously, because as in their words, as the way they put it is, we, the CEC, are their sparring partners. They know that we are the only organised resistance, opposition to this agenda. So, Craig, we're witnessing an escalation here, right, among churches of this depopulation agenda. Is this Christianity?
Oh, of course it's not, Robbie, but I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, because I don't want people to get the idea that somehow there's a lot of support for these people in the community. I mean, there's only 50 people at this meeting last night, right? And you'd think there'd be 500 or 1,000 by the way they go on.
The way they promote, sure.
It's just not true. Look, this issue of this depopulation issue is not popular. Like the whole shutdown of the Murray-Darling Basin is not popular, right? The carbon tax is not popular because people do know it's going to kill them. And that's why it's important that people join us in our mobilisations and say, stand up, do whatever they can in it. Now, what you find is that when you have a small bunch of people that are very vocal and very, passionate in the sense of wanting to kill people, they're going to find constituencies that will sort of come on board with them, right? And, what they've chosen is the churches in this particular case, because they're an organised grouping of people. But what the people in the churches have to realise that their concern for the environment, their concern for humanity is being railroaded by fanatical extremists that intend to kill people and violate the very principles that the so-called, or the churches are supposed to stand for. Now, as I've mentioned before on this, on the weekly report, the Catholic Church has come out specifically and said that there is a move towards Hitler-style eugenics back into Australia, and that's through the whole idea of the abortion debates, the euthanasia debates and so forth. They've come out very specifically supporting the principle that all human life is sacred. And that sacredness comes not as a matter of opinion, but because human beings are fundamentally different than animals. We are not animals. We are made, as I mentioned before, in the image of the Creator. And the quality of that, what we share with the Creator is the idea of creativity. We uniquely human beings are creative. We participate and can participate in the process of creation in order to transform the environment actually in a real way for the better, through the use of our creative abilities to make discoveries and transform the environment for the better. Now, there's some romantic notions out there that this environment, this Mother Earth, is some sort of sacred entity. She's a real bitch. And you only have to look at the earthquakes recently, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, cyclones, the bushfires, to realise that if we don't employ our creativity to, in a sense, control this bitch, then the problem is that human life will be killed.
Yeah, of course, we're not the ones who ascribe to Mother Earth a personality.
No.
So when you call her a bitch, you're taking
I'm taking the passionate view of the
greenies
greenies
description.
Exactly.
If they want to treat her as a personality, then you have to admit she's a bitch.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh, if that requires clarification, that's good. But look, that's how you have to view it, right? Because it's such a personal fight for them. You think they are sticking up for this mother image of Gaia or whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
So when the churches get sucked into this,
that's less Christianity and more Satanism.
Well, that's the whole point. This is a Satanist movement. This is the denial of creativity. It's the denial of the nature of man. So here you have this radical paradox that these greenies are coming into the church pushing a satanic agenda under the cover of Christianity. And that's the fraud here. So at least people that are watching this weekly report should actually educate themselves as to what we're saying. If they don't believe it, find out why we would dare say it. Because the evidence is there, and people have to realise that they're being used. The churches are being used, and at least, even the Catholic churches, there's elements of support for this environmentalist movement, but there's a real fight happening within that church. And I think, within every church, when people hear what the truth is, the nature of what the Queen is pushing, the nature of actual radical environmentalism, and actually do some work on it, have a look at the material, then they can make up their mind and make some discoveries about how evil this green movement is.
All right, thanks, Craig. So that's it for this week's weekly report. As usual, we've covered a fair amount of material, so look for the backup material on our website or on the LaRouche Pack and LaRouchePub.com websites. Next week and in future weeks, we're going to have some very important economic updates in the wake of things like the federal budget, which was unveiled this week, which we didn't have time for in this week's weekly report. So thanks for tuning in. See you next week.